Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Good evening and a very warm welcome to Newsline Zoom. I'm safely in my residence and my guest is safely within his. And here we go. Technology is recording all of this. And our guest this evening, of course, is none other than the former senior deputy governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. W.A.Wijewardena, who is, of course, an appropriate guest given the troubles that we are going through. Very good evening to you, Dr. Wijewardena.
Very good evening, Faraz, and thank you for having me on this program.
Now then, Dr. Wijewardena, can this Chinese money, this Chinese swap, be only used to pay the Chinese, or can it be used anywhere?
Well, Faraz, the central bank has issued a press notice confirming that the reserve position had been built up to US dollars 3.1 billion, and it will prevail at that level till the end of this year. But central bank has not given details as to how it has acquired these reserves. Most probably, the speculation in the market is that Sri Lanka would have got this or drawn the facility available with People's Bank of China to draw on 10 billion yuan, which is equal to 1.5 billion US dollars at the current exchange rate between yuan and US dollar. And when you add the 1.5 billion to 1.6 billion, which we had last week, the total tallies at 3.1 billion Faraz. So we speculate that particular increase in the reserves up to 3.1 billion US dollars has taken place mainly because Sri Lanka had decided to draw on the facility already approved by People's Bank of China to get 10 billion yuan for Sri Lanka. Those details have not been given for us in the central bank press statement. But usually, and of course, we don't know the conditions under which this particular soft facility has been granted to Sri Lanka. So as a result, we were not in a position to make a specific comment on how this can be used by Sri Lanka. But of course, if it is in yuan, yuan is not a convertible reserve currency in the world, and as a result, central bank will have great difficulty in converting this yuan asset into US dollars for the purpose of use. As a result, we may not be able to use it for purpose other than buying goods and services from China. But I will have to mention here, when we classify foreign reserves of a country, we have to do it by the definitions and the recommendations made by the Balance of Payments Manual, 6th edition, issued by the International Monetary Fund. There are two criteria which a country has to use in order to classify a particular asset as a reserve asset. One is the particular reserve asset should be under the control of the central bank of concern. The second one is it should be it can be used for financing the balance of payments requirements. When it comes to financing the balance of payment requirements, what is necessary is we must be able to freely convert whatever the asset that we have gotten into US dollars, so that we would be able to meet the general balance of payments requirements. So if these two conditions have not been met by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Central Bank cannot include it as a part of the country's foreign reserves. So Central Bank will have to give a further clarification to the market that these two conditions have been met, and therefore it is quite legitimate for the Central Bank of Sri Lanka to treat them as foreign reserves of the country.
So at the moment, Dr. Wijewardena, we are unclear of the exact terms of this swap.
Exactly. I mean, the press statement is just, two paragraphs, and it has actually hidden for us more than it has revealed. So it has allowed the market to make very wild speculations, and all these speculations are damaging to Sri Lanka rather than building up the confidence. And also another weakness in the press release for us, they have taken a punch on the rating agencies. The second paragraph had been fully devoted to ridicule the rating agencies and saying that, see, we have built up our reserves, but you have downgraded us. Of course, the rating agencies have been very clear on this point for us. They have said any improvement in the rating of Sri Lanka would be done only if Sri Lanka is able to accumulate foreign reserves without incurring an additional debt or corresponding debt. But in this case, if it is a soft facility, there is a foreign exchange liability coming for Sri Lanka. Therefore, there's an incurrence of a foreign debt. And therefore, according to the definition used by the balance of payments manual, as well as the definitions used by the rating agencies, this particular improvement in reserves will not increase the net foreign asset position of the central bank. Now, presently, net foreign assets have been around, say, $2 billion US dollars at a negative level. So that will remain as it is. And therefore, we were not in a position to make these comments on the reserve build-up unless the central bank comes up with full details. The central bank will have to give the market full details. Otherwise, the market is bound to make all kinds of wild speculations which are damaging to the initiative of the central bank to build up these reserves for.
So, Dr. Wijewardena, let's say we have $3 billion right now in the reserve. Can you do an analysis of the available information and tell us whether there is any more money coming from the Gulf or the Middle Eastern countries? Are there any indications?
Sri Lanka might get a credit facility from India, the result of the Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa's visiting India during the time of the budget debate. And according to that information for us, Sri Lanka will get a credit facility from India to import medicine, foods, and other essential imports. There's a separate credit facility for Sri Lanka to import fuel from India, but it has been tied up to another condition that we must modernize the unused oil tank farm in Trincomalee and make it available for use by India. The third one is there is this $400 million US soft facility to be received from the Reserve Bank of India under the SARC Finance program. And all these things are there, but so far these things have not materialized. Probably they might materialize in the course of maybe January or February next year. But if we take the present level of reserves at 3.1 trillion US dollars, 400 million we will take out because that is our gold reserves, and the gold has to be sold in the market to make it usable by Sri Lanka. So the usable liquid reserves will come down to about 2.7 billion US dollars, which is sufficient for us to import only 6 weeks of import for Sri Lanka. So that is the critical situation we are having here.
How immediate would it be if Sri Lanka went to the IMF? Would it be days, weeks? What's the time period then, Dr. Wijewardena?
This particular facility given by China, we have to appreciate that China has come to Sri Lanka's support. And it has helped Sri Lanka to have some breathing space. But it does not resolve Sri Lanka's chronic and acute foreign exchange crisis today. This breathing space has to be used by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka to start negotiations with IMF, get the IMF seal for Sri Lanka, and use that seal to generate more long-term funds for Sri Lanka to enable Sri Lanka to meet its chronic and acute foreign exchange crisis today. Otherwise, the effect of the present facility given by China, if we believe that it is a Chinese loan soft facility which has helped Sri Lanka to build up the reserves, will be dissipated within a matter of another 2 to 3 weeks' time for us.
In terms of time, how long between making the application and receiving the help from the International Monetary Fund then?
If Sri Lanka goes to IMF for us in January, probably the negotiations will take place for the next 6 months time period. And the loan facility, if approved by IMF, would be delivered to Sri Lanka by June next year. But the advantage for Sri Lanka is when the rest of the world comes to know that Sri Lanka has gone to IMF and IMF is positively considering Sri Lanka's demand for this facility, we will be able to build up confidence among the foreign investors so that the investors will look for Sri Lanka as a viable destination for their investments. The present press release issued by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka will not do that for us because it has not given the details to the market. Number two, instead of making the announcement and reporting the matter, it has taken a punch at the rating agencies, which should be negatively viewed by any prospective investor of money in Sri Lanka for us. So that is one of the biggest drawback that I see in the present arrangement.
As an economist, Dr. Wijewardena, do you see any other avenue?
Yes, for us. Right now, because the foreign exchange crisis is actually a matter relating to the external sector of Sri Lanka, which is connected to Sri Lanka's economic growth, Sri Lanka's monetary policy, Sri Lanka's inflation, and Sri Lanka's budget. So there are many other reforms that have to be undertaken by Sri Lanka in order to improve the foreign exchange situation of the country. But for that purpose, Sri Lanka will have to go for this long-term economic reform program. And that reform program must be market friendly, it should be business friendly, it should allow Sri Lanka to increase its economic growth, it should allow Sri Lanka to maintain inflation at an affordable rate, and at the same time, it should allow Sri Lanka's government to discipline its budget. If we don't have these preconditions available, there is no any other route available for Sri Lanka to come out of the present crisis.
So it's as simple as that?
Yes, it is as simple as that.
We have reports that around 70,000 arrivals, tourist arrivals, have been made into the country in the last few weeks. How much more do you think we need to up the game?
In fact, Sri Lanka's capacity to accommodate tourists is about 2.5 million tourists per annum for us, which means about 200,000 tourists per month. So if we can increase the tourist inflow, there again, those tourists must be prepared to spend money in Sri Lanka rather than outside Sri Lanka, because most of the tourists come to Sri Lanka for us on a prepaid package, where the money has already been paid into accounts outside Sri Lanka, which are not available to Sri Lankan authorities. So if we can increase the tourist inflow into Sri Lanka to about, say, 200,000 tourists per month, and if those tourists would spend money in Sri Lanka, we may be able to count on the tourist income to supplement the already depleting foreign exchange resources of the country. But it will not solve our problem. It is actually a supplementary support rather than a contributory support to the problems that we are facing in the country today.
And on that note, let's go for a quick commercial break, shall we? Well, it's not really a commercial break. It's to take a peek at this evening's headlines from that wonderful primetime news team. And as always, we'll see you on the other side of the break.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
Welcome back to Newsline Zoom. Today, amidst all these challenging circumstances, our guest is also by Zoom is Dr. W.A.Wijewardena, the retired former senior deputy governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Now then, welcome back, Dr. Wijewardena, and tell us, are you satisfied with the progress being made by revenue collection agencies like the Inland Revenue Department and so on?
I'm not satisfied, Farah, because we have data up to the end of August this year. The data show that Sri Lanka revenue generating agencies have been able to marginally improve the revenue collection during the first 8 months of the year compared to what we had generated in year 2020. As it is, Sri Lanka might generate about, say, 1.3 trillion Lanka rupees as revenue by way of taxation, which is just in the same level as the revenue that we had in year 2020 also. Unless we go back to the tax system that we had prior to 2019, I don't think Sri Lanka government would be able to generate the required amount of revenue to finance its activities. So in that case, Sri Lanka government's budget is still in a critical situation. It is in a crisis, and that crisis has to be resolved in order to resolve the crisis in the external sector of Sri Lanka as well. So I'm not happy about the progress they have made, and I can safely say with the current tax rate, Sri Lanka will not be able to generate the anticipated revenue for us through this particular mission.
Again, as an economist, what would you do to up the game in terms of revenue collection?
As I said, I think it is not a loss of faith for the Minister of Finance or the people in the Ministry of Finance or even President W.A.Wijewardena. They may have to, make an announcement that they made a mistake by going for this tax concessions offered to people in November 2019, and they may revert back to the old tax system. That is what they should do. It's not a loss of faith.
So basically, you've got to do what you've got to do.
Exactly. I mean, in the case of this fuel price formula for us, they accepted that by discontinuing with the fuel price formula introduced by Mangala Sabarivira was a mistake. At the same time, with respect to the fertilizer, organic fertilizer move, also they have now admitted it was a mistake. So likewise, there's nothing wrong in the government of Sri Lanka, the Gotabaya administration, accepting it as a mistake and going back to the old tax regime and generate the required revenue for the operations of the government.
So what you're really saying is that sometimes we simply have to do a U-turn. We must be able to do a U-turn.
Exactly. I mean, there are lots of mistakes committed by the present administration with respect to the economy for us. Some of them have been reversed. Now, you have noted all the price control gazettes had been withdrawn and all other types of controls that they had introduced, but still there are import controls, exchange controls, repatriation requirements, conversion requirements. All these things have actually frightened not only the citizens of Sri Lanka, but also they have frightened the prospective investors of Sri Lanka also. So these things have to be removed as quickly as possible, and we have to go back to the normal operations of a market economy in order to build confidence and push Sri Lanka back to the long-term economic growth path, which is about, say, 5% of growth per annum.
In your estimation, Dr. Wijewardena, how much longer of a hard time, economically speaking, will Sri Lanka face?
It is an abyss of which the depth cannot be seen by us for us to be. And we don't know to which we would fall. And therefore, it is better to avoid falling into that particular abyss, and we must be able to therefore recover Sri Lanka by doing that. So we don't know the gloomy picture, we don't know the period through which we'll have to work through. It is actually a situation where we don't know the future. In fact, no one is able to safely predict the type of economic conditions that might prevail in 2022, 2023, and into the future, unless we make a reversal of all the unviable economic policies that we had already introduced.
So basically, would you say that the principle amongst these sort of unviable economic policies, would you maintain that it is the tax concession that was given as being the most unviable, given that given to the people when this government came in?
Not only tax concessions, the imposition of the import controls, where we had actually controlled the importation of the raw materials. Number two is the repatriation and the conversion requirements forced on the people who earn foreign exchange in Sri Lanka. Number three, forcing commercial banks to sell 25% of the foreign exchange earnings by them to central bank, so that central bank can build up its reserves at the expense of the loss of foreign reserves by commercial banks. So which would lead to a bigger black market in foreign exchange and bigger waiting time for people to buy foreign exchange from formal sources, which would actually distort the entire foreign exchange situation of the country. All these things will have to be removed. All these things will have to be removed.
Dr. Wijewardena, what kind of ability does Sri Lanka have to reschedule some of the larger ISBs that are due for payment and so on?
We cannot do it for us, because for us to do that, 100% of the holders of these ISBs will have to agree to a rescheduling. What is happening is that even if, say, 99.9% has agreed, but 0.1% has disagreed, that 0.1% of the investors can take Sri Lanka to international courts and completely buckle Sri Lanka's move to reschedule them. Because it had happened to Argentina in 2011. 5% of the people who didn't agree to the rescheduling had taken Argentina to courts in USA, and it took 10 years time for the court case to be determined. And as a result, during that period, Argentina had to default its all payments. So what it means is that unless we do it under the umbrella of a reputed organization like the International Monetary Fund, Sri Lanka alone will not be able to reschedule them and have a breathing space for Sri Lanka. Either we default the payment or we honor the payment out of borrowed money. That is what we can do now.
Seems rather stark, Dr. Wijewardena.
Yes, I mean, it's a very gloomy picture, and I'm very sorry that we have to paint this gloomy picture. But of course, genuine people always would like to look at the gloom rather than the bloom, and then they are in a position to take corrective measures to eradicate the gloom. So why I'm telling all these things, Saras, is to enable the Sri Lanka's policy-making leaders to take a realistic assessment of the current situation and introduce the necessary reform programs to come out of the present crisis.
Well, that's the way it was on Newsline Zoom this evening. And thank you for putting up with us. This recording was made in the most challenging circumstances. And thank you very much to our guest, Dr. W.A. Wijewardena, who has constantly supported us in the quest to bring you the news and to explain the news and matters of great contention to us. Thank you. And that's the way it was. And as always, take care and God bless you.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat.